Having played my second run of Dark Souls 3 now, with a completely different build than in my first playthrough, there's something I noticed about the game and the Souls series as a whole, something that has been on my mind for a while. Souls bosses can generally be put into two categories: normal and gimmicky. Granted, this works more on a scale than as a hard category, but let me illustrate this with a few examples. To me, the definition of a normal Souls boss is someone like Artorias of the Abyss. A fight in which you are basically having a duel, avoiding the opponent's attacks via dodging or blocking and then dealing some damage yourself when you get the chance. There's no stun locking here, and recklessly attacking will get you killed quickly, so fights like these are pretty much always won by figuring out the boss's attack patterns. Most Souls bosses operate this way, and next to Artorias there are tons of further examples I could name here, not only including humanoid characters, but also the more monstrous ones like Quelaag, the Gaping Dragon, or High Lord Wolnir. Gimmicky bosses for me then are those that can be killed with multiple different approaches. And if you look back at the Souls series as a whole, by the way excluding Bloodborne as that is the one game I haven't played yet, thanks Sony, the game containing the most boss gimmicks in the series is actually Demon's Souls. A good example here is the Old Hero, a boss that is literally blind. He can see you and just slowly walks around the arena randomly lashing out, but the moment you attack him he will charge in your direction until he loses track of you again. This gimmick of a blind boss opens up a bunch of different ways to fight him. You could go in heavily armored, trying to take him on in melee combat, you could keep your range and try your luck with spells, you can even equip light or no armor and put on the Thieves Ring to mask your presence, which makes it almost impossible for the boss to ever notice you even while you're attacking him. Another good example is the Executioner's Chariot in Dark Souls 2. Normally this fight involves making it through the arena while fighting skeletons and necromancers, hiding in little alcoves whenever the chariot approaches, and then activating a lever at the end that smashes the carriage and makes the horse attackable. Given how atypical this fight is, however, you can once again apply various strategies, either rushing through or taking it slow, distracting the skeletons with certain spells and items, killing all the necromancers or trying to ignore them, and so on and so forth. But there's actually also a hidden option. Finding a safe spot, firing projectiles at the boss every time he comes around, and bringing him down to 30% health like this will cause the chariot to fail jumping over the pit in the arena, getting it stuck and clinging to dear life, while the player can safely approach to finish it off. Honestly, for the longest time, I didn't even know this trick existed. And right now you might ask me, what sense of triumph is there in defeating a boss if it's not a proper duel, and say that these strategies I'm describing are nothing more than cheese tactics? And you would be right. But where normal Souls bosses come down to testing your reactions and pattern recognition, gimmicky bosses can test another skill: your creativity. And creativity has always been a staple of role-playing games. Anyone who has ever played games like Morrowind or Pillars of Eternity knows that they often give the player a goal in form of a quest, but leave the actual method to achieve it up to him. When character X tells you to retrieve an item from character Y, then there are a bunch of different solutions available. You can kill Y, you can pickpocket him, you can intimidate him, maybe you can even talk to him and conspire to bring a fake copy of the item back to X. One way or another, all of these methods end in solving the quest. What's important about this aspect is that what method you choose largely depends on what character you are playing, both in terms of the character's skills as well as his morality and alignment. And solving problems by playing to your character's strength like this makes playthrough unique, because it personalizes your time with the game. That is one of the most basic appeals of role-playing games in general, and while they don't really offer comparable quest lines, when it comes to Souls games, it is really the gimmicky boss fights that provide something like this. Take the Deacons of the Deep as an example. From what I've heard and read, these are widely considered to be the worst fight in the game, which is funny to me because while I can see why, I had a great time fighting them on my first playthrough. You see, I was playing a glass cannon mage build, specializing in high single target damage from my spells, so when I had to go up against a boss consisting of 20 respawning monks that stand around the one target I actually need to hit, problems arose. My usual loadout simply wasn't cutting it, and suddenly I had to start experimenting with a bunch of different spells and weapons, finding out what the best strategy was, going AoE, focusing on the vital targets, using heavier staggering weapons, or keeping my distance. I even started using spells I would have never thought to use before. It still took me only 6 or 7 tries, but at the end of it I actually had gained a much better grasp of my character and my inventory in the process. Because that is what happens when you get to be creative once in a while. You start analyzing your options and trying them out. Of course, there are also other kinds of boss gimmicks, for example a normal boss fight in an unusual arena. The Taros demon being set on a narrow bridge comes to mind. Whether you want to take him head on, use the plunging attack, or even bait him to jump off the side of the bridge, the choice is entirely yours. And the beauty of fights like this, where the game opens up these possibilities, is that you get the chance to actually play to your character's strength, or even just your preferred playstyle, making your playthrough that much more unique by actively involving player preference. That is the difference between a normal boss and a gimmick boss in Souls. When a normal boss just comes at you swinging in a flat arena over and over, it really doesn't matter whether you block or dodge and then attack with a spell or a sword. All of these actions come down to reacting to a pattern and avoiding damage while dealing it yourself. Your character build in this scenario really just determines your efficiency to achieve victory, not the way in which you do. And no, of course I am not suggesting that all bosses in Souls should be gimmick fights, for two reasons. First of all, gimmicks can also go horribly wrong. If we take multiple ways to defeat a boss by playing to the character's strength or preference as the key characteristic of a good gimmick fight, then we can easily identify the bad ones as well, namely those that, well, don't do that. Bosses like the Bed of Chaos or the Dragon God, where you do nothing but traverse an empty arena interacting with a few objects. These play out the same for pretty much any build, and I would not for a moment want to see more of them. And secondly, yes, if you're not up for experimentation or playing a build that is either too good or too bad against a certain gimmick, then defeating or losing to these bosses can feel cheap and unsatisfying, and that is definitely a design problem. But the fact of the matter is that ever since Demon's Souls featured the highest amount of boss gimmicks, from then on normal fights started to far outnumber them. And the more I play these games, the less it matters to me if in a normal fight there's just one opponent or multiple ones, or if other attacks are flying into the arena from the outside. It ultimately all comes down to learning and reacting to patterns, which, when done too often, not only feels samey after a while, it devalues the build I chose to play and homogenizes my overall experience. So the next time you feel like complaining about a gimmicky boss, I hope you will instead try to get creative and see it as a welcome change of pace from the more typical fights, because as far as I'm concerned, a Souls game should have room for both. Bouken, signing out. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you want to support me any further, then a like and a subscribe go a long way. But also I'd encourage you to leave a comment on this video, because I'm actually curious if you guys agree or disagree with me and what your favorite boss gimmicks in the Souls series are. And if you want to check out anything else I do on this channel, then there should be two videos on your screen right now. My reviews of Free and also Ys Origin. By the way, both games that show I don't actually dislike pattern recognition fights. Quite the opposite in fact. So yeah, I hope to see you on my next video. And until then, bye bye.